Ma'am, please. Is your name Alina Whitaker? Do you have a son named Marcus? Marcus. My Marcus lives in Tokyo. He's a very important man. Ma'am, I am Marcus. The old woman looked up from the cracked plastic cup in her weathered hands, her eyes cloudy with something between disbelief and quiet shame. Around her, buckets of wilting sunflowers and carnations lined a broken sidewalk on Detroit's east side. A cardboard sign leaned against a milk crate she was using as a seat. It read in shaky black marker, "Flowers $3." Marcus Whitaker stepped off a Delta flight from Narita at 6:14 in the morning, expecting to surprise his mother with a warm hug and an announcement that would change her life forever. Instead, a taxi driver named Ray, who had recognized the address from Marcus's phone, refused to take him to the family home on Rosewood Avenue. Instead, he drove him to a dim corner near an abandoned meatpacking warehouse where an old black woman had been selling flowers before sunrise for the past 3 years. When Marcus asked why his mother would be there, Ray simply looked at him through the rearview mirror and said, "Son, I don't know what happened in that family, but someone's been letting her sit out there since spring of 2023. The words hit harder than any turbulence he'd felt over the Pacific. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional dramas about family secrets, quiet betrayals, and the shocking truths we uncover when we finally come home, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now, 9 years earlier, Marcus Whitaker had left Detroit believing he was building something no one in his family had ever dreamed possible. At 39, Marcus had become a name people whispered with respect in international finance circles. He had left home at 30 with a graduate degree, a scholarship from a Japanese trading firm, and the burning conviction that he could send his mother more money from Tokyo in 1 year than his entire block had earned in a decade. And he had done it. He had done more than that. He now sat on the executive board of an investment group with offices in Marunouchi and Singapore, and 3 months ago, he had closed the largest private equity deal of his career. Colleagues bought him whiskey worth more than his first car. His picture ran in the Nikkei, but sitting in the cabin of that overnight flight home, none of that mattered. He was thinking about his mother. Alina Whitaker had raised him and his older sister Yvonne alone on Rosewood Avenue after their father died of a stroke when Marcus was 11. She had worked double shifts at a nursing home for 22 years, coming home smelling of bleach and lavender lotion, her ankles swollen, her Bible always tucked under her arm. She never complained. She never asked for anything. When Marcus told her at 17 that he'd been accepted to the University of Michigan on a full scholarship, she had cried in the kitchen for so long that Yvonne had to finish washing the dishes for her. Alina Whitaker was the kind of woman who forgave people before they had even finished hurting her. The kind of woman who slipped a folded 20 into a stranger's pocket at church. The kind of woman who deserved a quiet, honored old age. Marcus watched the clouds change color outside the plane window and pictured her face when she opened the front door and saw him standing there. He hadn't told her he was coming, not this time. He hadn't told anyone, not even his sister. He wanted it to be real, unrehearsed, a gift. But surprises, he was about to learn, were easier than confessions. And the truth was, Marcus hadn't come home in 9 years. Not once. There had always been another quarterly report, another red-eye to Hong Kong, another apology sent through a wire transfer. He called his mother every Sunday at 8 p.m. Detroit time without fail. He wired money into her account through Yvonne on the first of every month. He had paid off the mortgage on Rosewood Avenue during his 2nd year in Tokyo. He had funded a healthcare account, a burial account, and even a modest emergency fund. In his mind, he had done everything a son could do. Yet as the plane began its descent over the pale winter light of Michigan, something twisted uneasily in his chest. Because deep down, he had always known that money and presents were not the same language. When the plane landed at Detroit Metropolitan Airport, Marcus moved through customs on autopilot. The terminals looked both familiar and foreign, as though someone had rearranged the furniture of his memory while he'd been away. He carried only a leather weekender bag and a bouquet of sunflowers he had bought at a small stand in the Narita Departure Lounge. Sunflowers had always been his mother's favorite. She used to grow them in the little strip of dirt behind the kitchen window, and every August she would cut one and place it in a mason jar on the table before Sunday dinner. He tried calling her from the taxi line. The call went straight to voicemail. He frowned and dialed Yvonne. Same thing. He told himself it was still early. It was barely 6 in the morning. Maybe they were both still asleep. Maybe the ringer was off. He climbed into the back of an old maroon minivan driven by a soft-spoken man named Ray, gave him the address on Rosewood Avenue, and settled back to watch the city he had left behind roll past his window. The freeway felt narrower than he remembered. The billboards were newer, brighter, but the exits still bore the same names. Livernois, 7 Mile. Gratiot. His chest tightened with each familiar sign. When they finally turned off the exit and began winding through the old neighborhood, Marcus rolled down the window despite the cold. He wanted to smell the air. He wanted to feel it. Detroit in early December smelled the way it always had, like wood smoke and rain and iron. But when they pulled onto Rosewood Avenue, Marcus sat up so quickly that the seatbelt locked against his chest. The house was there. That was the strange part. The little brick colonial with the white porch was still standing, but every window was dark. A large yellow notice had been taped across the front door. The mailbox was overflowing with soggy envelopes. The lawn had gone wild, dead brown grass reaching almost to his knees. A rusted padlock hung from the wrought iron gate his father had installed the summer before he died. Marcus stepped out of the van slowly. The bouquet of sunflowers dangled from his hand. He walked up the cracked concrete path, past the flower beds his mother used to tend on her days off, past the porch swing where he had learned to read. He stopped in front of the notice on the door. It was a foreclosure warning, dated 8 months ago. His knees didn't buckle. His breath didn't catch. He simply stood there, staring, as though if he looked long enough the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The wind lifted the corner of the paper and let it fall again. "Everything okay, sir?" Ray called from the van, his voice careful. Marcus turned around slowly. His face must have shown something because Ray immediately got out of the driver's seat and walked halfway up the path. "Do you know what happened to the family who lived here?" Marcus asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, flat and hollow. Ray hesitated. He was a man of about 60, gray at the temples, wearing a tiger's cap that had seen better days. "Whitaker family?" he asked slowly. Marcus nodded. Ray's face changed, not with surprise, with something closer to sorrow. "You family? I'm her son." Ray took off his cap. He held it in both hands for a long moment. Then he said the words that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. "Son, I've been driving this neighborhood for 31 years. Your mama used to buy tomatoes off me every summer when I ran a little produce truck. She's a good woman, a real good woman." He paused. "But she ain't lived in this house for a long time, and I don't think she's living anywhere with a roof over her head right now either." Marcus stared at him. The sunflowers slipped an inch in his grip. "Where is she?" Ray put his cap back on. He looked at the ground. Then he looked at Marcus with a kindness that felt almost unbearable. "There's a corner over on East Warren near the old Kroger warehouse. Some folks set up down there before the sun comes up, selling flowers mostly, odds and ends. Been about 3 years now. Every time I drive by, I see her sitting there with a little cardboard sign." He shook his head. "I always figured somebody must be looking after her. I always figured somebody knew." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly under his shoes. "Take me there," Ray nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." They drove in silence. Marcus stared out the window and did not blink. The bouquet lay across his lap like something dead. The drive to East Warren took 12 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Marcus watched the neighborhoods change through the window, boarded-up storefronts, a liquor store with iron bars over the windows, a church with a hand-painted sign that read Jesus Saves, an old barber shop where his father had once taken him for his very first haircut, now shuttered, its striped pole missing entirely. Every block scraped against another memory, and every memory now felt tainted, because somewhere in the middle of all this, His mother had been sitting on a corner selling flowers for $3 while he sipped 20-year-old scotch in a glass tower above Tokyo Bay. Ray slowed the van as they approached the corner of East Warren and Van Dyke. The sky was still the color of wet slate. A few street lamps glowed weakly. Steam rose from a manhole cover in the middle of the intersection. And there, tucked against the brick wall of what used to be a wholesale meat market, sat a small huddle of figures beneath a plastic tarp strung between two shopping carts. Marcus saw her before Ray even had time to point. She was sitting on a milk crate. A knitted headscarf covered her hair. A thick, mud-stained coat 2 sizes too big hung from her thin shoulders. In her hands she held a small tin cup, and on the ground in front of her, arranged with careful pride, were 3 metal buckets of flowers: sunflowers, yellow carnations, a few sad-looking pink roses that had already begun to droop. Her cardboard sign leaned against the crate. Flowers $3. Marcus stopped breathing. Ray pulled the van to the curb and put it in park. He didn't say anything. He just reached back between the seats and rested his hand on Marcus's forearm for a brief second. Then he let go. "I'll wait right here," Ray said quietly. "Take your time." Marcus stepped out of the van. The bouquet of sunflowers was still in his hand. He walked toward her slowly, as though moving too fast might shatter something. The cold December air stung his eyes. His polished Italian shoes clicked against the wet pavement. She didn't look up, not at first. She was talking softly to another woman sitting beside her, an older black woman with wispy white hair who was warming her hands over a small metal can that had once held coffee. Marcus could hear his mother's voice for the first time in 9 years. It was thinner than he remembered, rougher, but it was still hers. "Miss Dollars, I told you, you don't have to share your soup with me every morning. I ate yesterday." "Girl, hush. You didn't eat yesterday. I saw you give that sandwich to the boy with the crutch. That boy needed it more than me." "Alina, you gonna sit here and lie to Jesus like that?" His mother chuckled. It was a small, tired sound, and it broke something inside him. Marcus took another step. His shoe scraped against a broken bottle cap. Alina Whitaker looked up. For a long moment she simply stared at him. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Her lips parted. She tilted her head the way she used to when he was small, and she was trying to figure out whether he was telling the truth about how the cookie jar got knocked over. He watched her face carefully, waiting for recognition to arrive. It didn't come easily. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked politely. The formality of it cut him deeper than anything Ray had said in the van. She thought he was a customer. She thought he was a stranger. "Ma'am," Marcus said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, please, is your name Alina Whitaker? Do you have a son named Marcus?" She blinked. Miss Dollars stopped warming her hands. She looked up at Marcus, then back at Alina, then back at Marcus. Her eyes went wide. Alina set her tin cup down on the milk crate beside her. She stared at Marcus for another long moment. Then she smiled softly and shook her head and said the words that nearly brought him to his knees. "Marcus. My Marcus lives in Tokyo. He's a very important man. He works with numbers and computers over there. He calls me every Sunday." She smiled a little wider, as though sharing something precious. "You know, he's the one who bought me my house, paid it off all the way. Isn't that something?" Marcus felt the sunflowers slip from his hand and land softly at his feet. "Mama." Her smile froze. "Mama, it's me. I am Marcus." Alina Whitaker's eyes moved slowly across his face, from his forehead down to his jaw. From his jaw back up to his eyes, and then all at once her lips began to tremble. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh no." She did not stand up. She could not stand up. Her hands had begun to shake and her breath had grown shallow and quick. Miss Dollars, sitting beside her, immediately put a steady hand on her back and murmured something Marcus could not hear. Alina's eyes never left her son's face. It was as if she were afraid that if she looked away, even for a second, he would vanish and prove to be nothing more than a cruel trick of the cold winter morning. Marcus knelt down on the wet pavement in front of her. He did not care about the suit. He did not care about the shoes. He reached out and took his mother's small, trembling hands in his own, and the moment he felt how thin they had become, how the skin sat like tissue paper over the bones, he had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from breaking apart entirely. "Mama," he whispered. "Mama, what happened? Why are you here?" Alina Whitaker did not answer. Her mouth opened once, then closed. Her eyes filled with tears that did not fall, held there by some old, practiced dignity. She simply squeezed his hands with what little strength she had, and she looked at him the way a person looks at a memory they had made peace with never seeing again. Miss Dollars cleared her throat. "Son," she said, in a low, steady voice that carried the weight of authority, "your mama has been sitting on this corner with me since the spring before last. She's a proud woman. Proudest I ever met. She don't like to talk about how she got here. But if you her boy, and I believe you are, then you deserve to know something." She paused. She looked at Aliner gently. "Aliner, honey, is it all right if I tell him a little?" Aliner did not answer with words. She just nodded once very slowly. Miss Dollars looked back at Marcus. "Your mama ain't been in that house on Rosewood for near about 3 years. Somebody took it from her. Ain't my place to say who, but it wasn't the bank at first. It was somebody who knew her. Somebody she trusted." Miss Dollars' mouth tightened. "The bank came later, after everything else was already gone." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was not surprise. Somewhere in the back of his mind, from the moment he had seen the foreclosure notice on the door, he had already begun to suspect. But suspicion was not the same as knowing, and hearing it out loud from a stranger on a Detroit street corner at dawn was something his body did not know how to absorb. "Yvonne," he said quietly. Aliner's eyes closed. A single tear finally slipped down her cheek and disappeared into the folds of the scarf around her neck. Miss Dollars said nothing, but her silence said everything. Marcus stayed kneeling for a long moment. He did not trust himself to speak. He was aware, in some distant part of his mind, that people were beginning to walk past on their way to work, glancing curiously at the well-dressed man in the long wool coat kneeling on the sidewalk in front of an old flower cellar. He did not care. He would have knelt there all day if it meant his mother could keep holding his hands. Finally, he stood. He took off his overcoat and wrapped it gently around his mother's shoulders. She protested weakly, but he shushed her the way she used to shush him when he was sick as a boy. He turned to Miss Dollars. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Marcus Whitaker. I flew in from Tokyo this morning. I did not know. I want you to know that. I did not know." Miss Dollars studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly and something in her face softened. "I believe you, baby. Your mama always said you were a good boy. She said it every single morning right here on this corner. She said, 'Miss Dollars, my Marcus is a good boy. He doesn't know if he knew he'd come.'" Miss Dollars' own eyes grew wet. "Well, here you are, you came." Marcus turned back to his mother. He crouched down again. "Mama, I'm taking you somewhere warm, right now. We're going to get you a hot meal. We're going to get you a room. And then we are going to sit down and you are going to tell me everything. Whatever happened, whatever anyone did, whatever you're afraid of, we are going to face it together. Do you understand me?" Aliner Whitaker looked up at her son. Her lips trembled. And then, so softly he almost missed it, she whispered, "Baby, please, please don't call your sister yet." Marcus stared at his mother for a long, silent moment. The words she had just whispered hung in the cold morning air between them like a warning bell. "Please don't call your sister yet." Of all the things he had expected to hear from her lips, of all the tearful reunions he had imagined during the long flight over the Pacific, this was not one of them. Not even close. He did not press her. Not yet. He simply nodded once gently and squeezed her hands. "Okay, Mama, okay. Not yet." Aliner exhaled a small, shuddering breath. Her shoulders sagged with a relief so deep it looked like exhaustion. She had been holding something in for a very long time, and the promise not to call Yvonne, for whatever reason, seemed to loosen the first knot in a rope that had been strangling her for years. Marcus turned to Miss Dollars. "Ma'am, is there anything here that belongs to my mother? Anything she needs to bring with her?" Miss Dollars gestured to a black plastic garbage bag tucked behind the milk crate. "Everything she got in the world is in that bag, baby. Bible, blanket, few clothes, some pictures. She don't own nothing else." She paused. Then she added more softly, "There's a shelter over on Mack Avenue where she sleeps most nights. Sisters of Mercy, good women, they've been looking out for her." Marcus nodded. He picked up the garbage bag. It was almost weightless. He picked up the metal buckets of flowers. He picked up the cardboard sign. He carried all of it to the van. refusing to leave anything behind because it belonged to his mother, and if it belonged to his mother, it was not garbage. Ray got out and helped him load everything into the back without a single word. Then Marcus went back for Alina. He crouched down in front of her once more, wrapped his arm around her waist and helped her stand slowly. She was so light, so terribly light. She weighed less than his overnight bag. He guided her carefully to the van, and Miss Dollars followed alongside, murmuring encouragement. Before Alina stepped inside, she turned and looked back at Miss Dollars. The two women held each other's eyes for a long moment. No words were exchanged, but Marcus could see, in the way they looked at each other, that these two women had kept each other alive on that street corner. That they had shared bread and prayers and the small silent kindnesses that only the truly poor understand. Alina reached out and touched Miss Dollars' face with her thin fingers. Then she climbed into the van. Marcus turned to Miss Dollars. He reached into his wallet and pulled out every bill he had on him. American, Japanese, it didn't matter. He pressed the entire stack into her hands. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you." Miss Dollars looked down at the money. Then she looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp and steady. "Baby, I don't need all this." "You do, please," she studied him. Then she nodded slowly and tucked the bills into an inside pocket of her coat. "You take care of that woman," she said. "You take care of her and you don't let nobody else hurt her. You hear me?" "I hear you, ma'am, I promise," Miss Dollars nodded. And then unexpectedly she reached up and put her hand on Marcus's cheek. "Your mama prayed for you every single morning, son. Every single one. Even the mornings she was hungry. Even the mornings it was raining. She prayed for you." Her voice broke slightly. "You remember that?" Marcus could not speak. He nodded, blinking hard, and got into the van. Ray pulled away from the curb slowly. In the passenger seat, Alina Whitaker looked out the window at the corner she was leaving behind. She raised her hand and waved once, small and tired, at Miss Dollars. Miss Dollars waved back, and then she sat down on the milk crate alone, and the van turned the corner and she was gone from view. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Ray drove with quiet purpose, heading toward downtown Detroit. Marcus sat in the back seat and watched his mother. She had begun to cry silently, her face turned toward the window, one thin hand pressed against the cold glass. "Mama," he said gently, "where do you want to go? Do you want to go to the shelter first to get your things?" She shook her head. "No, baby, there ain't nothing at the shelter but a cot. I got everything I own with me right now." Marcus swallowed hard. "Then let me take you somewhere warm, somewhere clean, somewhere you can rest." Alina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very softly, "Just take me somewhere your sister can't find me." Marcus asked Ray to take them to the Book Cadillac downtown. It was the first hotel that came to mind, a grand old building his father had once pointed out to him when he was a child, telling him with pride that one day, if Marcus worked hard enough, he might stay in a place like that. Ray nodded and drove them there without asking any questions. When they pulled up under the wide portico, the doorman looked once at Marcus in his tailored suit, once at the thin old woman clutching a black garbage bag, and had the grace to say nothing at all. He simply held the door open with a small, respectful bow. Marcus tipped Ray a sum that made the older man's eyes widen, then insisted on his phone number. "I may need you again," he said quietly. Ray nodded and slipped him a business card with a shaking hand. Then he tipped his tiger's cap and drove away into the pale winter morning. At the front desk, Marcus booked a 2-bedroom suite on the 12th floor. He handed over his black credit card without looking. The clerk, a young woman with a neat blonde bun, glanced at his mother with soft eyes and offered to send up a robe and slippers, a light breakfast, anything at all they might need. Marcus thanked her. He asked if the hotel had a doctor on call. She nodded and said one could be there within the hour. Upstairs, Alina stood in the middle of the suite as though she was afraid to touch anything. The carpet was so thick her worn boots left small impressions in it. She stared at the wide windows overlooking the city, at the crystal lamp on the entry table, at the framed print of the Detroit riverfront on the wall. She held her garbage bag in front of her chest like a shield. "Baby," she whispered, "this too much." "Mama," Marcus said gently, "it's not enough. Nothing I do now will ever be enough, but this is where you're going to rest tonight, and every night after this until we figure out what comes next." She looked at him with those tired, watery eyes. Then she nodded once, small and obedient, the way a child nods when she is too tired to argue. He ran her a warm bath. He laid out a soft cotton robe from the hotel closet. He set out a pair of slippers. He turned on a lamp beside the bed and pulled back the crisp white covers. And while she disappeared into the bathroom, he sat down heavily in an armchair by the window, buried his face in his hands, and finally allowed himself to weep. Silent, shaking sobs that he had been holding back since the moment Ray had said the words "she ain't lived in this house for a long time." He wept for the years he had missed. He wept for the Sundays he had spent on the phone thinking a wire transfer was the same as a hand on her shoulder. He wept for the pride his mother had held onto every single one of those calls, telling him she was fine, telling him she was proud of him, telling him her Marcus was a very important man. When he lifted his face, the sky outside had turned from slate to a soft, pale gold. The sun was rising over Detroit. He wiped his cheeks with the back of his hand and stood up. By the time Eleanor emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in the robe, her hair still damp, her face scrubbed clean of the grime of the street, she looked more like the mother he remembered. Older, thinner, more fragile, but hers. She sat down on the edge of the bed with a soft groan and let out a long breath. "I ain't had a hot bath like that since the summer of 22, she said quietly. Marcus sat down in the armchair across from her. He did not want to push, but he could not wait any longer. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Mama, I need you to talk to me. I need to understand. What happened to the house? What happened to the money? What happened to you?" Eleanor looked at her hands for a long time. Then she looked up at him. Her eyes were clearer now, sharper, as though the warm bath had washed away not only the dust of the street, but also some of the fog she had been living behind. "Baby," she said softly, "before I tell you anything, I need you to promise me one thing." "Anything, Mama," she held his eyes. "Promise me you won't hate your sister." Marcus did not answer right away. He could not. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because the truth was, he could not honestly make that promise, not knowing what he was about to hear. And his mother, who had raised him to never lie to her, seemed to understand this. She simply held his gaze and waited, patient, the way she had waited for him to admit small childhood sins at the kitchen table 30 years ago. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Mama, I can promise you I will try. I can promise you I will listen before I judge. I can promise you that whatever I feel, I will not act on it until I have heard you all the way through. But I cannot promise you I will not be angry. Not until I know." Eleanor considered this for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "That's fair, baby, that's fair." She adjusted the robe around her shoulders and folded her thin hands in her lap. And then, in a voice steadier than Marcus had expected, she began to speak. "Your sister lost her job at the hospital about a year after you moved to Tokyo. You remember she was working as a billing supervisor over at Henry Ford. She had that little office. She was so proud of it." Eleanor smiled a small, sad smile. "Well, they let her go, restructuring they called it. She never told you because she said you had enough to worry about being new in a foreign country and all. But she came to me one night crying at my kitchen table and she said, 'Mama, I don't know what I'm going to do.' And I did what any mother would do. I told her not to worry. I told her we would figure it out together." Marcus felt his stomach begin to tighten. He said nothing. He let her continue. "For a while she looked for work real hard, but nothing came. Bills started piling up. Her car got repossessed, then her apartment. She moved back into the house on Rosewood with me, and baby, I was glad to have her. It gets quiet in that house alone." Eleanor paused. Her fingers picked at a loose thread on the hem of the robe. "You were sending money every month, good money, more than I needed. I told you that, remember?" "I always told you I didn't need so much." "You told me you didn't need so much," Marcus said quietly. "But you never told me why." Eleanor's eyes lowered. "Because I was giving most of it to your sister, baby, every month. She said she just needed to get on her feet. She said she was so close. She had a business idea, a home care agency taking care of old folks. She said if she could just get some startup money together, she could turn it all around." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "And I believed her because she's my daughter. And because you were doing so well over there, and I thought, well, maybe this is what family is for. Maybe this is why the Lord blessed us with what he blessed us with, so we could lift each other up." Marcus felt the tightness in his stomach twist into something sharper, but he kept his face still. He nodded gently, letting her continue. For about 2 years, she took the money and worked on the business. She hired a consultant. She rented a little office space over on Woodward. She got some business cards printed up. She showed them to me at the kitchen table one Sunday. She was so proud of them. Alina's smile trembled. But the business never really opened. She kept saying it was almost ready. She kept saying she needed just a little more. And I kept giving. I kept believing. She paused. She looked out the window at the golden morning light on the city. Then, about 3.5 years ago, she came to me with a stack of papers, told me she had found a way to get the business off the ground once and for all, some kind of investor loan. But she said the loan required collateral. She said the house on Rosewood would qualify. She said it was just a formality. She said I would still own it, that it was just paperwork, that once the business took off, everything would be paid back within 6 months and I wouldn't even notice a thing. Alina closed her eyes. And I signed, Marcus. I signed those papers, sitting right there at my own kitchen table with the smell of the chicken I was cooking for her dinner in the air. I signed the papers that gave my house away. Marcus sat very still. He did not trust himself to move. His hands were resting on his knees and he could feel the tremor beginning in his fingertips, a small vibration that seemed to travel up through his arms and settle behind his eyes. But he kept his face calm. His mother needed him to keep his face calm. Alina opened her eyes and looked at him. She saw the tremor. She always saw everything. 6 months came and went, she continued softly. Then a year. Then 18 months. The business never opened, baby. There was no business. There never had been. I don't know what she was doing with the money. I truly don't. I asked her once and she cried so hard I thought she was going to make herself sick. She said she had made some bad decisions. She said she had gotten involved with some people. She said she was trying to fix it, and I believed her again, because a mother believes her child. That's what a mother does. She paused. She reached for a glass of water on the nightstand and took a small sip. Her hands shook slightly. Then one day a man came to the door. He had papers. He said the house wasn't mine anymore. He said it hadn't been mine for over a year. He said the investor she had signed those papers with, they weren't really an investor. It was a private lender, and the lender had already taken the deed, and the lender had sold the deed, and whoever bought it had been paying property taxes on it in silence, waiting for the eviction paperwork to go through. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment. He could see it. He could see his mother standing in the doorway of the only house she had ever owned, listening to a stranger explain to her that she had signed her life away over a plate of chicken. I asked your sister where she was, Alina said. She was gone. She had moved out 3 weeks before without telling me. She had a new address in Southfield. When I called her, she wouldn't answer. When I called her again, the number was disconnected. When I finally reached her through a friend, she cried and said she was so sorry and that she was working on getting the house back and that I just had to trust her a little longer. Mama, Marcus said quietly. I know, baby, I know. The money, my money that I was sending you every month for 9 years. Alina looked at him. Her eyes filled with tears again. Baby, every dollar, every single dollar. She told me you knew. She told me you had agreed to help her because she was family. She told me the two of you had talked about it, brother to sister, and that you had said it was fine and that I shouldn't bring it up on our Sunday calls because it would embarrass her. She wiped a tear from her cheek. And I never brought it up, not once. In 9 years of Sunday calls, I never once asked you about the money because I thought you already knew. Marcus stood up. He did not mean to. His body simply moved. He walked to the window and pressed his hand against the cold glass and stared down at Detroit, at the tiny cars moving along the streets below, at the river gleaming pale gold in the morning light. He could feel his pulse hammering in his neck. He could hear his own breathing. He could see, reflected faintly in the glass, his mother sitting on the edge of the bed behind him, watching him, waiting. He thought about the Sunday calls. 9 years of Sunday calls. His mother's voice, warm and steady, telling him how she was doing, how the garden was coming in, how the church potluck had gone. Never once mentioning that Yvonne had lost her job. Never once mentioning that the money was going elsewhere. never once mentioning that her house had been quietly signed away over a piece of paper she had trusted her daughter with. And he thought about Yvonne, his older sister, the one who had helped their mother wash dishes the night his scholarship letter came, the one who had driven him to the airport when he first left for graduate school, the one who had said at their father's funeral, "We have to take care of Mama now, Marcus, that's on us." He turned around slowly. "Mama," he said. His voice was very quiet. "After you were evicted, where did you go? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me?" Alina looked down at her hands. "Because your sister told me you already knew, baby. And she told me you had said there was nothing more you could do." Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. He reached out and steadied himself against the back of the armchair. His mother was still looking at her hands, her thin shoulders curved forward, as though she were bracing for a blow she had been dreading for years. "She told you what?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. "She told me," Alina said slowly, "that she had called you when the eviction papers came. She said the two of you had talked for over an hour. She said you had told her that you were going through a hard time in Tokyo, that your investments had taken a turn, that you had bought a big house over there and couldn't sell it, that you had a Japanese woman you were trying to marry and her family was expensive and there were customs to follow." Alina's voice broke slightly. "She said you told her that you loved me but that there wasn't anything else you could send, that the monthly money was already stretching you thin, that the two of us women would just have to figure it out." Marcus stared at her. "Mama," he said, "none of that is true. None of it. I have never bought a house in Tokyo. I rent an apartment in Roppongi. I am not engaged. I am not seeing anyone. My investments have never been better. In the last 3 months alone, I have made more money than most people make in a lifetime." His voice cracked. "Mama, there has never been a single moment in the last 9 years when I could not have helped you. Not one." Alina closed her eyes. She did not cry this time. She had perhaps no tears left. She simply sat there on the edge of the bed with her eyes closed, and Marcus watched as something in her face slowly rearranged itself. Something she had believed for 3.5 years, something she had used to explain to herself why her son had not come home, why her son had not called more often, why her son had let her sit on a street corner selling flowers for $3. It had been a lie, all of it. A carefully constructed, quietly told lie, whispered by her own daughter over cups of coffee in a house that no longer belonged to her. "Oh, baby," Alina finally whispered. "Oh, my baby." Marcus crossed the room. He sat down on the bed beside her and put his arm around her small shoulders. She leaned into him. She was so light, so terribly light. He kissed the top of her head the way she used to kiss the top of his when he was a boy who had scraped his knee. "Mama," he said gently. "Why didn't you ever bring it up on the phone, even once, even to say goodbye?" Alina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I was ashamed, baby. I was so ashamed. I thought I had failed you. I thought I had raised a daughter who had done this to us, and I thought that meant I had failed at being a mother. And I thought if you ever heard the truth, you would look at me the way people look at foolish old women who have lost everything. And I could not bear to have my son look at me like that." She paused. "And your sister kept telling me that if I said anything, if I asked you for help, you would cut me off entirely. She said you had already threatened to. She said the only thing keeping the Sunday calls going was my silence." Marcus pulled her closer. He felt her heartbeat against his side, fluttering like a small bird. "Mama, listen to me. I would never, ever, ever have cut you off. There is nothing in this world that could have made me cut you off. Do you understand?" She nodded against his shoulder. "I know that now, baby. I know that now." They sat there for a long time, mother and son, in a warm hotel room high above Detroit, watching the morning light climb the walls. Marcus did not speak. He simply held her. He let her feel that he was real, that he had come, that she was safe. After perhaps an hour, Alina stirred. She looked up at him with those tired eyes. "Baby, what are you going to do?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said in a voice so calm it surprised even him, "Mama, I am going to call my sister. And I am going to hear it from her own mouth. And then I am going to make sure that you never spend another cold morning on a street corner as long as you live. And I am going to make sure that whatever your daughter did with my money and your house is answered for. Legally, completely. In front of a judge if it comes to that." Alina looked at him for a long moment, and then, very softly, she said, "Then let me be in the room when you call her." Marcus nodded. He would not have called his sister without his mother present anyway. Alina had earned the right to be in that room. She had earned the right to hear every word. He waited until the hotel doctor had come and gone, until Alina had eaten a warm bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar and a soft-boiled egg, until she had slept for 3 hours in a bed with clean white sheets, and had woken up looking a little less like a woman the world had forgotten. Then together they sat on the small sofa by the window in the late afternoon light, and Marcus placed his phone on the coffee table between them and dialed his sister's number. Yvonne picked up on the fourth ring. Her voice was cautious, professional, the voice of someone who had trained herself to expect trouble. "Marcus, is everything okay? It's the middle of the night for you." "I'm in Detroit, Yvonne." There was a long pause. He could hear her breathing. "You're what?" "I'm at the Book Cadillac with Mama. She is sitting right next to me." Another pause, longer this time. He could almost hear his sister's mind racing, calculating, searching for a story that would still hold. "Marcus, I can explain. Yvonne, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am not calling you to yell. I am not calling you to accuse. I am calling you because our mother has been sleeping in a shelter on Mack Avenue for over a year and selling flowers on a street corner for $3 while you told her that I refused to help. I want to know why. I want to hear it from you. And then I want to know what you did with the house and what you did with the money and what you are prepared to do to make this right." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Marcus wondered if she had hung up. Then finally he heard the sound of his sister beginning to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, ragged breaths. "Marcus," she whispered, "I'm so tired, I'm so tired." Alina closed her eyes. "I'm listening, Yvonne," Marcus said. And then Yvonne began to talk about the job loss, about the shame, about a boyfriend named Andre who had convinced her he could turn a small investment into a fortune, about the way that small investment had disappeared, and how she had chased it with a larger one, and then a larger one, and how the home care business had never been anything more than a story she told herself and their mother, about how she had signed the papers on the house because Andre had told her he knew a private lender who could get her out of the hole in 90 days, about how Andre had disappeared 6 weeks later, about how she had been living in a small apartment in Southfield, working 2 shifts at a warehouse in Romulus, sending Alina $100 a month when she could, telling herself that was enough, telling herself their mother understood, telling herself that Marcus would never find out. By the time she was finished, the sun had set over Detroit. The room was lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp. Alina was holding Marcus's hand tightly. Marcus took a long, steady breath. "Yvonne," he said, "you are going to come to this hotel tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You are going to sit down with me and Mama and a lawyer I am going to hire tonight. You are going to tell us everything on paper in writing. And then we are going to figure out together what comes next. There will be consequences, Yvonne, but you are still my sister, and you are still her daughter, and I am not going to throw you away. Do you understand me?" His sister wept softly on the other end of the line. "I understand, Marcus. I'll be there, I'll be there." He hung up. Alina squeezed his hand. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something he had not seen since he was a boy. Not gratitude, not relief, peace. The quiet peace of a woman who had finally been allowed to set down a burden she had carried alone for far too long. "Baby," she whispered, "you came home." Marcus kissed her forehead. "Mama," he said softly, "I should have come home a long time ago, but I am here now, and I am not leaving again, not for a long, long time." Outside, the lights of Detroit blinked on one by one against the darkening sky. Somewhere in the city, a woman named Miss Dollars was folding a tarp against the cold. Somewhere in Southfield, a daughter was sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, staring at a phone, weeping into her hands. And high above it all, in a warm hotel room, a mother and son sat together in the quiet, holding hands, saying nothing and understanding everything. Because the truth is, no wire transfer, no phone call, no distant promise of Sunday nights can ever replace the sound of a son's footsteps at the door. Some things only presence can pay for. And Marcus Whitaker had finally, at last, come home to pay what he owed. Not in money, in minutes, in hours, in days, in every ordinary act of being there. If this story touched your heart, and if you know a parent or grandparent who is still waiting quietly for the sound of your footsteps, take a moment tonight to call them, to visit them, to simply be near them. Life is far too short, and love, real love, is never delivered by wire. It is delivered in person. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And in the comments below, tell me, is there someone in your life you have been meaning to come home to? Share their name if you'd like. Share your story. We are all in this together. Until next time, peace.